Welcome to Ladies Talking Love, Season 3, Episode 16, Finding Joy Through Setting Boundaries. It's Ladies Talking Love, a community of women uncovering more joy and fulfillment in sex, as we learn from experts and amazing women like you. Together, let's create a world where women's sexuality is celebrated and understood, beginning with our own. I'm your host, Ariel Finlinson. Let's talk love. I'm really excited for this episode to talk about setting boundaries with your kids. There are so many lessons that you can learn because what we're going to talk about with setting boundaries is crucial to you being able to create a life that you love and being able to create a life that brings you joy and fulfillment. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, Ariel, why do you have an episode on setting boundaries with your kids when you talk about sexuality? Well, here's the thing. So much of our life feeds into our sexual relationship with our spouse. And if we aren't setting good boundaries with our kids or with these other aspects of our life, or setting boundaries to make sure that we have the space we need to find joy in our life, it is for sure going to feed into our sex life and affect the way we can show up as a full and authentic self. I think everyone who's a parent can probably relate to the fact that often we feel so overwhelmed and we feel so drained that we don't have anything left to give our spouse. And this is an episode that's going to help you change that. Because it's so important to be able to have enough at the end of the day to be able to connect with our spouse. But even more than that, it's important to set boundaries so that we stay safe as an individual and have space to be ourselves and grow into ourselves and keep ourselves as a parent, because that is going to give you the energy and the authenticity to be a better parent, a better spouse, a better wife, a better mother. It's going to affect all the areas of our life. And so, yes, we are going to dig into setting boundaries, because setting boundaries with your kids is crucial to the way that you can then show up in your marriage. I've made a special freebie. The link is in the show notes. It's called Grow into Loving Motherhood. And this is a 5-step guide of things that you can do to take care of yourself so that you can be a better partner and a better parent. And one of the steps is setting boundaries with your kids. And so this episode goes right along with the other 4 steps that I set of how I grew into loving motherhood so that I could get rid of that overwhelm. And even though the overwhelm still shows up, I don't want you to think that I never feel overwhelmed as a parent. But now with these 5 steps that I outline in my freebie, I know what to do to get back on track and to take care of myself so that I am living a life that I love and I have the energy that I want to give not only to my kids and my family, but to myself and also my spouse. Today, we get to learn from Ralphie Jacobs. She has changed the way I parent and been such a blessing in my motherhood. Ralphie lives in Austin, Texas with her husband and their 4 daughters. As an early childhood education expert, Ralphie quickly learned that the best way to impact a child's life for good is to teach parents. She founded at Simply on Purpose, where she has built a community of over 500,000 families and writes about parenting, family culture, and living with purpose. Her audio course has changed thousands of homes, and she travels across the country speaking at workshops on positive parenting. But without further ado, let's talk love. I'm so excited to welcome parenting expert Ralphie Jacobs onto Ladies Talking Love today. Thanks so much for joining me, Ralphie.
Woohoo! Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Oh, I love it. Ralphie has been such an amazing influence in my life, and you are going to gain just some fantastic insights today. And I'm really excited. We're going to talk about boundaries and setting boundaries. And this has been a really important thing in my motherhood to realize, because at the beginning, I didn't know how to do this, and I'm still learning. And it's made a big impact on how I can show up and actually enjoy motherhood, whereas previously it felt too heavy. So I'm really excited to dig in. Could you just start off by giving us a definition of what is a boundary?
It's a really good question, because I think that sometimes parents confuse, at least I was confused for a long time about what a boundary truly was. And I was doing it wrong. So a boundary to me now is, what am I going to do in order for this to be okay for me? It really doesn't have to do much about what the other person is going to do, but what you are going to do. So parents sometimes confuse a boundary with a demand. Like, so if I say, you need to clean all of this up and it must be done, so you're just saying what they need to do, but you're not saying anything about what you're doing. So it's really so much more about what you're doing. So if I have a child that's climbing all over me and it's really bothering me, the boundary would be, that's bothering me, I'm putting you down now. So it's what you're doing. Or if your child keeps going up to the Christmas tree and breaking ornaments, you can say, I'm going to put a gate around the tree, or I'm going to put the ornaments up really high. Because the truth is, we can't set boundaries for other people. We can only decide what we're going to do about the behaviors that other people are going to do. And regardless of the decisions that they make, even after we set that boundary, we hold the boundary.
Oh, that is so helpful. Yeah, because sometimes it's like, okay, I'm going to make this boundary and I'm going to have my child, they have to do this, but it's more about us and what boundaries we're going to set to keep us safe and to keep
Yeah.
our environment or things the way that they need to run smoothly. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this quote that I love by Lois Latham. She's the wife of Dr. Glenn Latham, who was a pioneer of positive parenting. And anyway, what she says is, parents need to learn to control themselves and the environment. So basically, those are the boundaries, right? Like, we control ourselves. Those are the boundaries that we're setting. And then we're setting boundaries around the physical and intangible environment around the child. And then when we can do those two things well, then a child learns how to control themselves.
Mm.
So we're not directly in control of them, but we're in control of what we do. We're in control of the environment around the child. And then the child learns to control themselves. And that's all about the boundaries that we're setting. We're setting values and culture within our home and those rules that we have. And we're deciding what we engage in, what we don't engage in, what we pay attention to, what we don't pay attention to. All of that is about the boundaries that we're setting.
And I think that's such a profound thought to think about because our kids are going to learn how to control themselves and how to channel these big emotions or big feelings by watching us. And so if we can set these healthy boundaries, how we're going to control our emotions or hard things that come up, then they get to learn from us.
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. What are some examples of healthy versus unhealthy boundaries that we can have for our kids?
Well, like with everything that parents do, we can either really help things or we can make it harder and hinder. One of the unhealthy pieces of a boundary that I've seen parents do is they use love as a reward or denial of love as a punishment, depending on how a child responds to a boundary. And that is an unhealthy piece of if a parent decides to use boundaries that way. Unconditional love, when we say we love you no matter what, right? We say that to our children all the time. I love you no matter what you do. I love you to the moon and back. But unconditional love is really setting a boundary for yourself. And no matter what the other person chooses to do, you love them. That's just kind of was a big aha moment for me, was in all the places of my life, right? Not just with a parent-child relationship, but with my own parents, with my friends, with my spouse. The truth about that unconditional love is I can set a boundary. Those are the choices that I am making. But no matter how you choose to respond to it, if you decide to throw a tantrum, if you decide that that's something that you don't like, or my mom comes over even though I asked her to not come over today or whatever, I can love them no matter what. And I can say, this is the boundary that I'm setting, and you can choose how you want to respond to it or the choices that you make around it. But I'm still holding that boundary, and I'm going to love you no matter how you respond to that boundary. So that's probably one of the biggest things. Remember that love is a law. It's not a reward. It's not a punishment. It's just something that is. It's just there and available to the child, no matter how they're responding to the boundary that you are creating, the limits that you're creating for them.
And it just exists no matter what they do. Can you give us a little bit of an example? Because some of us might be like, okay, wait, do I do this? Like, say a child throws a tantrum, what would it look like if we're still showing that love no matter what they're doing versus someone who might be having conditional love?
Right. So somebody that is struggling with holding their boundary and showing conditional love, I actually, really thinking about it, I think that people that are solid in their boundaries and are comfortable with them without having any guilt attached to them, like they know why, they're able to hold them and also hold the unconditional love as well. Somebody that's struggling with the why and struggling with triggers and feeling guilt around it, or feeling like it's unfair for the child to be responding to the boundary that way, whatever it is, like that resentment and contempt for the boundary, they're the ones that are going to respond to it in a negative way. So if a child's throwing a tantrum and is flipping out and the parent flips out right along with them, like, get in that corner and stay over there. I don't want to hear a peep out of you, and they just start like flipping out right along and they're escalating with the child, then that's really denying the child of your love. And it's unfortunate because we're losing an opportunity to model what it's like to stay calm, to respect ourselves around a boundary, and to teach our children that there are going to be some no's in your life, or you're going to just tell people no. And this is something that I have to separate myself around, but I don't have to be mean about it. A parent who can set a boundary but also hold onto that unconditional level of child's throwing a tantrum would be a parent saying, I can hear you. This is hard for you and frustrating for you. I'm going to be nearby. Come on over and give me a hug when you're ready. You're still saying, I'm not going to give in to the thing that you're throwing the tantrum about. I'm still holding that boundary, but I'm going to be nearby. And my love for you is free and welcoming and available to you, but I'm just not going to engage in this behavior right now. Let me know when you're ready. Come on back. So you're just showing a path back to you. That's something that is a beautiful habit for parents to learn how to do, is to always show that path back to you whenever a child's ready.
Oh, I love that phrase, show a path back to you. And this is like ringing a bell. Just yesterday, my 3-year-old was throwing a big tantrum.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for things like this that I've learned. I was like, I'm sorry, I can't be with you right now. But when you're ready, I'm ready to snuggle you if you need it. She's like, oh. But then after a little while, some separation, she was calling my name and I went and I was like, do you want me to hold you? And she was like, yeah. So I think that is such an important thing and goes along with what you talk about of staying safe as a parent.
Yeah.
Because at least for me in that moment, I feel like I needed to have a little bit of separation to stay safe so I could not lose it, right? Can you tell us a little more about what does that mean to stay safe, and what are some boundaries that we might need to come up with as parents so that we can stay safe in the moment?
Yeah, to me, I say that often. It's kind of like a catchphrase with the content that I create, is to stay safe, to be a safe parent. And to me, being a safe parent is a parent that's consistent, a parent that children want to be around, children feel safe around, someone that children can come to in good times and in bad, that they just know that the proverbial arms are open
Mhm.
and ready and waiting. And it's a beautiful thing to be that safe parent and to see those fruits of being that safe parent to the child. I love hearing when people send comments about how their child made a mistake and then they came and apologized to the parent because they knew that the parent was going to be safe, that the parent wouldn't get angry or mad. And so the boundaries that you can set to be safe and to stay safe, first of all, is to just really be clear about what you will and you won't do. That helps you to stay in that safe mode. For example, let's say that it's homework time. Kids are like, oh, all of a sudden they're helpless. They have no, they can't do a thing for themselves. And a parent could very easily feel triggered and frustrated and get angry and be like, what in the world? Why does it always have to come to this every single day? To be a safe parent would be to say, I'm available between 4 and 5 to help you with your homework. Just let me know if you need any help. So you're creating a boundary between what you will and you won't do. You're setting a clear expectation. You're showing them exactly what you'll do. You're sending messages that your love and your support is there, but in the end, it's their life choices. It's their life, right? And you can't be absorbed into every little inch of their life. because that's micromanaging. That's not going to allow them to feel empowered. They're going to learn helplessness if we do that, because they'll figure out like, oh, mom's responsible for my life. I don't have to be responsible for it. Choose to decide that you're not going to worry more about their homework than they are. That's just an example of one way to stay safe. I also love the phrase, I need time. I think for some reason, parents feel like they have to have the answers immediately, that they have to know what to do. And that's something I wish I could like shout it from the rooftops. You don't have to know what to do. You're a human. You can use time. It's okay for you to say, you're upset right now, but it's not okay for you to say hurtful things. I'm going to need a breather. So I'm going to come back in 3 minutes and I'm going to think about what to do here. I mean, what an awesome thing to model for children to hear that. Like, I don't know what to do all the time, but I'm thoughtful and I'm intentional and I'm going to respond to you in a thoughtful way because I love you and I honor and respect our relationship so much that I'm really going to think about it. And it just allows them to be human too. And for them to think like, oh, I really need to think about this in order to make the right decision.
I love that so much.
Yeah, time's a free gift. It's a free gift. Like
Yeah.
everybody has it. It doesn't cost us anything other than a few minutes to just sit back and say, oh, what should I do here? I need some time. And so creating that boundary of, I'm not going to respond right now. I'm going to use some time. Take it. Use time to
Yeah.
your advantage.
That is powerful. And would you say the same thing? Because that was something I was going to ask you. I'm so glad you brought that in for staying safe. And all of us have a threshold, right? Of like what we
Yeah.
can handle. Would you say the same thing for like if you need a moment to calm down, just to make sure that they know I need to go take a moment to calm down so that I can stay safe and I'm going to come back in this amount of time or I'll be back when I'm ready? Is that kind of how you make sure that they know you're a safe place, but you also are setting the boundary like, I
Yeah.
have to have some space?
Yeah. That is being a safe parent. And it's absolutely, like I said, again, sending that message, I value our relationship enough to not throw mud at it and
Mm-hmm.
to say things in the heat of the moment that I don't mean. And so I'm going to come back and I'm just going to honor this relationship by trying to keep a cool head and not be triggered about my story. I'm going to go away from this, have a clear perspective. There's this parenting. I mean, we're kind of getting derailed a little bit, but
Oh,
there's this parenting theory called go to the balcony.
mm,
I mean, you're essentially like taking time to step away from it, using a boundary to say, I don't know what to do here. And then you go up and you, in your mind, you're thinking, okay, how would I look at this as if I was watching a play?
mm,
Like I was watching other people. I'm in the balcony now and I'm watching other people. What would I do or what would I advise somebody to do if this weren't me, if this weren't my child? And it just helps you to have this bigger perspective of what's really going on, what maybe patterns you're involved in that are actually making things harder. And so then you can go back and say with a cleaner mind and a clearer perspective, this is how I want to respond to this. This is my better self.
I think that's perfect because I feel like that's a huge thing for me in setting boundaries. I think I felt really guilty. I did feel guilty. I
Mhm.
didn't think I did. I felt guilty for so many years at the beginning of parenthood because I felt like I needed to be safe and be able to be with my child 24/7, right? Like whenever they
Right.
needed me, whenever they were having a hard time. And it was an important thing for me to realize I can still be a safe, loving parent and say, I need to go away for a minute. I'll be back. And there was a lot of guilt for me around that. Like I felt like I had to be ready to be with them all the time instead of allowing myself to be human
Yeah.
and to show them. And I think that's been a really important shift to realize they get to see me as a human and then they're going to get to learn, oh, this is what I can do when I'm feeling frustrated. I can go take a minute before I come back and figure out. I can go to the balcony. I love that, like a bird's eye view, right?
Yeah.
To kind of reevaluate, which this is maybe a little off topic, but for the bird's eye view, there are some times with our kids where it's like, I have no idea because it is so dumb what they're fighting about. Like, how can
Right. Yeah.
I have no idea. What are some tips for helping us and them work through those moments?
Where you are going to the balcony and you're trying to figure out what to do. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
First of all, what really helps me is thinking about their development and thinking about their brains rather than what's like being expressed on the outside. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
So like kind of being a citizen scientist and thinking, oh, yeah, this is part of their brain development. This is not personal, it's not a personal attack on me. This is just them really not knowing how to solve the problem. That's why they're always
Mm,
tattling. Or this is their brain going under reconstruction. And that's why they're so surly all the time because they're a teenager.
yeah.
And so it just really helps me think this is not personal. This is just their brain hijacked. They're a toddler. They flip their lid. They're no longer using their prefrontal cortex. Their amygdala is like on high alert and they're in fight or flight. And they're just going to have to express and expel those emotions until they feel better. It's not something that's against me. It's not against my parenting. I can stay calm in this moment because it's really just about them going through life's journey. And they need me to show them the path to walk on. They need me to show them how to stay calm. They need me to show them how to look for what's good in them, even though, there might be a whole lot of junk in there too, to kind of sift through it and find something that's good and point it out to them so that they behave the way that they see themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And how else do they find that if they don't have somebody to shine the light and say, this is what I see in you? The balcony really helps me to remind myself, what is my role?
Mm,
What's my role here? My role is not to get things to just stop and knock it off and fix everything that goes wrong. I mean, that's really a default of our brain, right? It was
yeah.
we're the danger finder, the fixer, that's our primitive brain. Like, what's going wrong here? We got to find the thing that's going wrong and fix it. But that's not really our job. Our job is to be the giver of good things
Mm.
and to lift and to stay calm and to provide encouragement so our children can thrive within the environment that we create. So the balcony is a great tool for that, to help us to stay calm and use time.
And I love that too of when you were talking about tattling, right? They don't know how to solve this problem, so this is how they're doing it. And I think that's such a powerful thing for all of our relationships. Maybe my partner's reacting in this way, and we're not talking about brain not being formed, but just what is the deeper meaning here?
Right.
Are they feeling lonely? Are they feeling
Right.
overwhelmed? That's so helpful with our kids and our other relationships to kind of step back to the balcony and be like, oh, what's going on here? Like, what's some of the deeper
Yeah.
things that are causing these hard feelings or behavior or
Right. Like, find the truth of the matter. What's the honest thing that's happening here? It's interesting. I was just thinking about it this morning because somebody just sent me a message about contention, that they didn't want any contention in their home. And I was like, that's a good thing to not want to have. But I think that there's a difference between conflict and contention. Conflict is
yes.
something that naturally happens, right?
Yes.
There's like people that are different, that are individuals living in a home. So you're going to have conflict with siblings. You're going to have conflict with parent and child. You're going to have conflict with your spouse. That's going to happen. But contempt happens when you're not living those conflicts out honestly.
Mm,
And so I think that happens with parent and child, is that we're looking at the symptom and not the root cause. And if we can just look at the root cause, that's the honest truth. That's honestly what's happening. And so I think it helps us to just live at a way where it's comfortable to disagree with each other. It's comfortable to learn how to support each other in our differences, but also to just live honestly with each other.
that is so good. And that's actually a huge thing with what I do. I think a lot of us think that conflict is contention. And if we can't separate those two, it can be really harmful for our relationships. There's tons of research that talks about that a lot of women self silence because they don't
Mhm.
want to cause contention or conflict in the relationship. But we're actually limiting the potential of our relationships when we're not showing up authentically.
Right.
And there's like such a difference between conflict and contention. And what you've been talking about with boundaries and taking time, we can do in our marriage relationships as well. We can come back and have a conflict, but we can do it in a kind and safe way versus
Mhm.
contention. And so I think all these principles are so helpful with our kids, but also with all of our relationships to
Yeah.
take a step back, to realize we need to show up. We need to be able to say, I don't agree with that, but be able to talk about it in a healthy way, a safe way,
Hmm.
instead of just art. Because, yeah, that'd be awful to not have any conflict because we're different and we don't all want to be the same.
Yeah. It's a healthy and natural byproduct of living in a home with different people. And it's actually like a great service to society that we have children
Right.
because and multiple children, because they learn how to negotiate, they learn how to hold boundaries, they learn how to, yeah, navigate a world where there's other people that are different than them. There's actually just research that just came out that children that disagree and squabble and have sibling rivalry with their siblings, there's more brain development.
Wow.
It's really interesting.
And that's so good to hear, right? As a parent,
Yeah.
okay, this is like helping them develop. This is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. It's just a reminder like this is good, healthy, and natural. It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Naturally, as a parent, I want my kid to just be like, yes, okay, I'll do it.
Right.
But every time they say no, I have to remind myself, this is good. I want them to not just say yes to whatever anybody tells them to do. And
Right.
then we can talk about it and figure it out. And they get to start using their brain to figure out how they stay safe, what they're okay with, what their boundaries are.
Totally true. And how unfair is it for us to say we can have boundaries, but you can't?
Yes. Oh,
You know? Like
yes.
that doesn't make any sense to say I can have all the boundaries in the world and I can decide when I want to be alone and when I don't. And I can decide when, I take a bath and when I don't, or I can decide whether I want to eat this broccoli or not, but you can't.
Yes. Is so good to think about. Kind of going back to feeling guilty as a parent, as a mom, what are some ways that we can make sure to have boundaries that let us take care of ourselves without feeling like we're neglecting our kids or feeling that guilt?
Hmm. I think it's really important to show self-respect and to model self-respect. I think that maybe that will help to take away a little bit of the guilt, is to say, this is really good for my child. And also to remember that a part of parenting is just holding space for our kids, even though they don't understand the whys. It's okay that they don't understand yet, but that we still hold space for the whys. Like Brian and I would go on date nights every Saturday. And my littlest, she is such a mama's girl, and she would cry every time we would leave. And it would just be like a peeling off the leg kind of a situation. Try not to slam the little hands in the door.
Right. Oh,
It was so heartbreaking. I'd walk away being like, oh, is it worth it? But in the end, they don't know yet that you are a far better parent because you're creating a life that you love.
mhm.
And investing in your relationship with your spouse is part of that.
Yeah.
Making your own sunshine and that you're a person too. Guilt doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't serve your family and it doesn't serve you. And so know that there's going to be parts of your parenting life where you're just going to have to hold space. Your kids are going to say, I want that phone right now. And why can't you let me have it? Or I want to go do that sleepover. And why won't you let me? Or whatever boundary it is that you've decided to hold, you're going to have to hold space for them until they know why too.
Mm,
And it might be a long time.
yeah.
You can try to help explain it to them. And again, boundaries that are held strongly and without a lot of guilt behind them is that when you really know why as well. Sometimes I say that parenting is not a social matter. It's not, because if we allow society to dictate how we parent, parenting becomes coercive really fast.
Mm.
So holding space and holding that boundary of like knowing I'm not going to let society dictate how I parent. I'm going to make choices for myself. I remember one time having a little girl come downstairs. She was at a play date with my other daughters. They were upstairs and she came downstairs because they were arguing about like who was going to play Ken and who wasn't going to play Ken, because nobody ever wants to play Ken, but he's a really important part of the storyline in the Barbie situation. So she comes downstairs and she's like, aren't you going to do something about that? Like, aren't you going to fix this? I was like, oh, you know what? They're sisters. They're going to figure it out. That's me holding a boundary and saying, I'm just going to stay down here and I'm choosing not to respond because I know the why. I know that actually sibling conflict is healthy, that especially this amount of it right now, right? They're just like jousting, they're butting heads, but they're not like throwing punches and there's no blood or anything. And so I'm like, they're going to figure it out. I'm not kidding you. She flips her hair and she looks at me side eye and she's like, well, trust me, we don't behave like that in my house. And then she like, and I was like, oh, like, oh my goodness. And all of a sudden the walls start to crumble around my resolve to not go up there. Then I reminded myself, I know the why. I know that there's so many good things that they're learning. They're learning how to forgive each other. They're learning how to compromise. They're actually bonding as they figure out how to resolve this difference. And so holding on to that why, not only for your children, but for you too, as you make a boundary, don't waver. I love what Janet Lansbury, she calls it being a confident leader. Just be confident in the decisions that you're making and have a confident stride as you have to hold those boundaries, because they'll bounce up against them. There's so many benefits to setting those boundaries with your kids. There's so many. Children thrive on limits. They need them. Sometimes I try to explain to parents, a boundary is like a wall that you hold up, and children are bouncing a ball up against the wall. If there's no wall there, the ball is just going to keep going, right? So there's no limits. You can't know where you end and other people begin. You don't know what you're responsible for and what they're responsible for. And so when children have boundaries, they learn what unconditional love looks like, what it feels like. They learn what they're responsible for and what they're not responsible for. They learn what a home feels like. It actually beckons them and welcomes them home when there's consistent limits, because it says to the child, I love you enough to hold these limits for you and to protect you. I would talk about different kinds of boundaries and limits that parents have to hold and how they're difficult. And parents would message me back and say, I wish that my parents had held these boundaries for me. Why didn't they love me enough to hold that boundary? Why didn't they care enough to set a curfew or to say no to this and this must be done or this needs to happen, or I'm going to engage in this way and I'm not going to engage in that way? Like, why didn't they care enough to hold those boundaries for me? So children love them.
Yeah.
They need them.
Even though it seems like they don't, because they're testing them out all the time.
Oh, that's their job, right? Like, that's part of their job. They're going to show their distaste and their hate for the boundaries, and your job is to hold them.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, especially for people listening who are like, okay, I haven't set a lot of boundaries, and they're deciding what they're going to set. Your kids are going to test them and they're going to bounce up against them, and you're going to have to hold it strong. And I think that's so good to know that it's going to happen and there's going to be a fight about it, right? No, why are you doing this? You know? And I loved how you talked about the why. And I think that was a huge shift for me when I was talking about the guilt of feeling like I needed to be a safe parent all the time, which to me meant I have to be accessible whenever they want me, versus realizing that I am a safer parent when I have boundaries that say, I actually need to go on a date. I need to go do this. I need to go on a date with my husband. I need to go have some time alone to work on this passion project. When I come back, I'm a safer and better parent. And realizing the why, it was just so overwhelming that like I can't take any time away to be a good parent, but realizing it's actually the opposite. I needed that time to be a better parent.
The things that I think about a lot is that true self-love. I mean, we talk a lot about it. That's like one of the buzzwords in the last 5 years is taking time for ourselves and self-love. But true self-love is building a life that you don't want to escape from. So if that means that self-love is really investing in that time with your child so that they believe you when you ask them to do things, they listen to you, they want to be around you, they enjoy being at home, or going on a date with your husband, that's also self-love because you're building that life. I think that it really matters to kind of think of it that way, because sometimes self-love really isn't all that loving. Sometimes we're like, well, out of the name of self-love, I'm going to go and take a 2-hour bubble bath and you guys are going to watch TV. Like, that's not really that self-loving, because you're not really building that life that you don't want to escape from. It's not about escape. It's about, what am I building here? And if you're like, I'm building something that's good and it's great, and maybe my children don't understand it right now, they'll be so grateful for it in 5-10 years, then there's no need for any kind of guilt, especially if it just makes you be a better all-around happier person. One of the greatest gifts that parents can give is parents that love their lives, that just love their life, that are happy people and love being around the people that are part of their lives.
I'm a big believer that this movement of self-love, we often default to band-aid solutions versus the
Yes.
consistent things that actually, yeah, build this life, that help us engage in a way that we're building something for us, for our families, whatever it is that lights you up so you can love your life and be a better parent, be a better partner. And a lot of people might be like, okay, Ariel, hold on. You talk about sex on your podcast. Why do we have a parenting expert on it? But I think this discussion has been so important for me in creating a beautiful relationship with my spouse, because before, not knowing how to set boundaries with my kids, I didn't have anything else to give to my spouse
Mm.
because I was so drained and overwhelmed. We talked a little bit about it, like when you were talking about going on a date and having to peel your child off,
Yeah.
what are some boundaries that can be important? They don't have to be specific because it can be depending on the couple, but what have you found? Why are setting boundaries with our kids important to our marriage or partner relationships?
Well, I just think that allowing that space and time to just be a person too, a person that has a lover, a person that has someone that's their best friend, and it's not your 4-year-old, it really centers you. You have a loving relationship that gives you a center that allows you to make wiser decisions in all aspects of your life. If you feel confident in that relationship, that feeds you, that just makes you so much happier. I think that it gets harder when they get older. Like sometimes my teenager will come in and it's like 10 o'clock at night and we're like, okay, time to leave, we're going to start making out if you
Right.
don't, Yeah, I think it's really important for them to also see parents that model being in love, that just love each other, because there is research about looking at parents, and because they're both 50% of you, the way that they talk to each other, the way that they interact with each other, it just makes children feel so much safer, so much more secure. It helps them to feel better about themselves because, again, these parents are half of them. It allows them to just have more self-love for their own person. So it helps create a stronger family unit. I'm a huge fan and advocate for strong families. And so investing in intentionally creating boundaries that protect your own relationship with your spouse is really, really important. And I know that a lot of times, especially when children are little, it gets put on the back burner.
Yeah.
But there are ways, and you probably talk about this a lot, that you can still fit it in.
Yes.
You can still make it special.
And I do talk about that, but I'd love if you just have a couple tips you could share of what are some ideas if you have young kids to prioritize time for dates or making love or whatever it is. And when your kids are a little older, because you mentioned like it can be harder when they're older and they're coming in at 10 and you're like, out away.
So when they were littler, we would they have early bedtimes. And that was something that was really important to me is, first of all, that my kids get really good sleep. Sleep was like the trump card.
Yep. Oh, me too.
I was like, nap times are really important, quiet time is really important. And all of it was like a codependency, like important for them and important for me. It helped everything. Them get good sleep, better behavior, me getting a break, better behavior.
Yep.
Everything is good. So when they are young, they go to bed earlier. And so we would have date nights at home when finances were tighter. We would just get takeout, or I would just make something a treat later on, and we would just shut the door and lock the door. And we did that a lot. And we did that a ton, especially during COVID, because there was no place to go.
Yes.
That was so tricky and harder. But just sending the message like, you guys have got this, and go into the bedroom. I think that it's kind of a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
It just depends on, there's some parents or some relationships that feel like they don't need date night. I remember one time I was in college, was before I was married, and my brother was living in the same town. And so I would offer all the time to babysit so that they could go on a date night. And my brother would always say, we don't need to go on dates. And I'm like, yes,
Yes,
you
you
do.
do.
He's like, we're already married. And I'm like, no. Like, you need to go on them. And I think just kind of creating a message that's like it's a non-negotiable, and it's not just for us, but it's for the whole family. If
Yeah.
you are walking in stride with your partner, if you're talking about things that matter, you're reconnecting, your emotional intimacy.
Yeah.
You're using the time to do that. I mean, just yesterday, I was like, I haven't felt like I've talked to you. And so we just sat on the couch and talked, and it was just for 30 minutes about what was going on in our lives. And it was just like, there you are. There's my best friend.
Yes.
I
Yes.
love that. Oh man, it would be a lot trickier to do it without that. And so prioritize it, schedule your priorities, schedule it.
Yeah. Your older kids, what are some tips to do that? Because you said it's harder because they go to bed later.
Oh, yeah. Well, lucky enough, they also are gone more often.
Yes.
I mean, I didn't mean to make it sound like that. It's not, I'm not happy that they're gone more often,
But
but
there's more time and freedom to kind of maybe do
right.
a
Yeah.
midday
You can
date or
squeeze things in. Yeah. You can squeeze things in. And they're really, really capable too. And so if there's something where, I mean, it's just easier to do date night because we also have a babysitter. So even though maybe it's harder during the weekday, that, and I'm like, yoo-hoo, time to leave. We're going to bed now. It is easier on the weekends for sure, because
Yeah.
just like, okay, yeah, sure, got this. What temperature do I set the oven for the pizza? And then we just head out. It gets harder and easier. I mean, parenting surprises me all the time. I'm always like, oh, it's a lot easier than I thought, or oh, it's a lot harder than I thought. But it's like a push and pull, right?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating journey.
It really is. This has been so awesome. Thank you so much, Ralphie. Just as we close up, for women, parents wanting to start implementing some of these healthy boundaries with their kids, where would you tell them to start?
I think one of the things that parents confuse often is that they can be kind and firm at the same time.
Mm.
That sometimes they feel like, well, if I'm setting a boundary, I need to be like really firm about it. I need to be really upset or angry, or they won't believe me.
Mm.
But there's kind of like the pendulum swings both ways. On one side, we have permissiveness, which is like there's no boundaries, but then there's also no freedom, because who wants to like play the game if nobody knows the rules? If there's no rules, then there's really no freedom, because you're always afraid of doing what's wrong. And then on the other side is the authoritarian, which is totally boundary. There's no freedom there either, because got a strict rule or somebody that demands strict obedience. And there's a beautiful middle ground called authoritative parenting, where there's boundaries and there's freedom.
Mm.
So again, the true meaning of boundary is that you are in control of yourself, you're in control of the environment, and then the children control themselves. And so within that, they still have choices, they still have decisions to make, and you can be kind and firm while you state your position and what you're going to do.
Yeah.
For example, if I said to my child that's arching their back and not willing to get into the car seats keep us safe while we drive, and I'm going to help you get in.
Yeah.
And so then you just hold your boundary, and you're kind and firm at the same time, but you're also not getting angry and saying, all right, we're not going, or you're not throwing a big fit about it, or you're like, okay, fine, we don't really need the car seat anyway. It's an arbitrary law. It doesn't really matter. And you're finding that middle ground, right? Where you're like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm holding a boundary, but I'm also respecting that you don't like it.
Yeah.
And also something that I would say is that tone of voice really matters. It really matters how we speak our boundaries. So for me to say, I'm getting you in this car seat and it doesn't matter, like, so getting angry and mad about it, or if you're not in the kitchen, but in 1 minute, I'm going to start eating by myself. It really does matter how you speak in the tone of voice. So saying, I'm going to help you in, or that really hurts, I'm going to put you down now, or I hear that you're upset, but I can't let you hit me. Holding those boundaries, but using a tone of voice that's still respectful to the child and their frustration and the emotions that they have.
Oh, thank you. This has been so awesome. Where can people find you and more of your resources?
Simply on Purpose. That's Instagram. That's my handle there. And that's where I do most of my content creation. I do reels and I talk in stories and I teach there and I give lots of free printables. So hang out there.
She does. They're fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, we really want to be helpful to parents and give bite-sized pieces so that they can kind of chew on them and can work in their families. So Instagram is the best place. And also I have a website called simplyonpurpose.org. And I have webinars that I teach about specific topics. And I have an audio course called 4 Parenting Principles That Make a Difference in a Day. And they're all positive parenting principles that change a home from the ground up foundationally based on behavioral science and all the goodness. It's just a life-changing course.
Oh, I love it. I'll make sure and link all of those in the show notes. If you want to connect with Ralphie, you can find that there. She is so fantastic and has been such a blessing in my motherhood. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ralphie.
My pleasure.
This episode with Ralphie just had so many fantastic takeaways. I love the idea that setting boundaries with your kids is a way to be a safe parent. For the longest time, I really believed that to be a good mom, I needed to be there for my kids whenever and however they wanted me to. If they wanted to be on my lap, I had to let them be on my lap. If they wanted to be touching my hair and crawling all over me, I needed to be there and let them do that. If they were throwing a fit and hitting me, I still needed to be with them. Just there was so much guilt for me around feeling like being a good parent meant that I put up with a lot and just I never had a time where I needed a break. To be a good parent, I just needed to be all in all the time. And this shift to realize that boundaries actually made me a better parent because I could act better, but also was important for my kids to realize that I'm a person, that I sometimes need space to calm down and think, that I need to do some of my own activities that bring me joy and help me create a life that I love and that I want to be in. I loved how Ralphie said it, that true love is building a life you don't want to escape from, that setting boundaries allows us to create that life. And I am totally with her when we talk about this idea that of self-love. I think that a lot of us sometimes think of self-love as massages and pedicures. And for me, that really seems like a band-aid. It seems like something that we're trying to find joy in by taking care of ourselves. But I have realized that actually true self-care comes from consistent things that we incorporate into our lives that bring us joy. And that is the crux of my freebie, Grow into Loving Motherhood. I give you 5 steps that I have taken into my life that bring me joy and things that are so important to create that joy. Like, for instance, setting boundaries with my kids so that I have that space and so that they know I'm a person. They know I have passions and ideas and things I'm working on and things I want to do, but also to set boundaries to say, I'm a person that needs space right now. I'm a person that I'm going to eat that cookie, even though it's the last one. You've already had one and it's my turn. But instead of being this parent that I used to believe was the best kind, right? That just gave and gave and gave and was always willing to sacrifice for their kids. And I'm not saying that sacrificing isn't a bad thing. I think having kids requires a lot of sacrifice, but it's important not to lose ourselves, because if you lose yourself and give so much that you don't have anything left, that actually is going to make you a worse parent and a worse spouse. And I really believe that taking steps to create a life that you love is going to change you and your parenting and your marriage for the better. Along with Ralphie's immense wisdom for parenting, I loved some of the things that she taught that are so relevant to our marriages as well. This idea of time, that there is enough time and there's enough time for us to take time to make decisions and to take time to calm down before we talk with our spouse, and that conflict and contention are 2 different things. I think that is something we really need to lean into in our marriages and in our families. Not saying your opinion because you think someone is going to disagree with you is not helpful. That's not authentic. And that is not going to give you the depth of relationship that you really desire. And so if you are suppressing yourself to not cause contention, you're not showing up authentically. And this doesn't mean that we're yelling and screaming, but taking space, taking time to say, hey, I actually have a different opinion on this, or hey, I need to talk about something that might be kind of hard. Can we have a time that we can talk about it when we can be calm? And if we need to take a break during, that's fine. But conflict is different than contention. And it's so important to be able to handle conflict with our kids and also with our spouse, because we all have different opinions. We all come from different backgrounds. And it's important that both spouses can come with these different ideas and opinions, but be heard and valued. It doesn't serve anybody to just hold your tongue if you disagree, or it's going to be a hard thing. In a loving and healthy relationship where partners are really working together and wanting to work together, even if they don't know how to yet, you can get through the discomfort and it's going to bring you closer together. I hope that this episode on boundaries was really helpful for you, not only about how to set boundaries with your kids, but also how to connect better with your kids and how to connect better with your spouse and how to create a life that you truly love. I hope that the freebie I created for you, Grow into Loving Motherhood, it's linked in the show notes, will give you even more tools besides setting boundaries with your kids of what you can do to create a life that you love so that you don't feel the need to escape by constantly going on social media or just doing some of these kind of numbing activities that we do, shopping, to get out of our life because it's too hard and it's too heavy. I hope that the steps I've laid out for you in the freebie will help you find that sweet spot where, yes, there will be overwhelm and there will be hard things, but it's a life that you love because you're creating it with people you love and you're taking care of yourself. As always, thanks for talking love. Thank you to all of you who listen and join me on this journey, and to our Ladies Talking Love team who make the podcast possible. Thanks to our sound wizard, Kimberly Demers, and our miscellaneous task whiz, Jana Norman.